Good morning, everyone. I've been reflecting a lot on what's happening in the world, obviously. I think everyone has. And I've noticed how, to start with, I didn't want to say anything because I was afraid to say the wrong thing. And that's a bit of a BS in a way. So I decided to speak up about my beliefs against racism. And it's not just racism, it's against homophobia, it's against ageism, sexism. I'm aware there's also a lot of isms that are not being made illegal yet, like discrimination against people who are ill, whether it's a mental illness or a physical illness. Well, especially the mental illness. I haven't seen anything in the law, at least in the UK, that helps with that. And this morning in the car as I was driving, I was thinking also of financial discrimination. Because, for example, it's come to my notice that in the UK, under COVID, the schools are going to open again. The state-owned school are going to open again in mid-June. But private schools are not going to open until September. So there is a sort of discrepancy between the way, there's a financial discrepancy here that's really important to acknowledge. But let's get back to racism for now, because I suppose it's the thing that is at the forefront of most people's minds for now. And I feel really ashamed that I haven't stood up before or spoken up before about my passion and my zero tolerance for racism. For me, it's like non-negotiable. But there's something I want to say to you, though. I do not believe in shaming racists as either. And I'm reading a book at the moment that's really making me more aware of racism issues, because I am completely ignorant. Okay, I will hold my hand up and say I know nothing about it. And that's why I'm probably going to say stupid things. But what I've come to realize is that, where was I? I think I lost my thread. Well, first I also wanted to honor my friend Rainer and all the people of color that I've met, that have trusted me enough to let me into their lives and be friends with them. I realized it was an honor and a privilege, and that I would understand if people didn't want to, because of my skin color. And I also wanted to share that actually I have been on the receiving end of racism myself, but I didn't even know it was racism because in my ignorance, I thought racism was only white people towards people of color. So I know what it's like in a minute way, you know. It's not happened to me every day, but I've been on the receiving end of lots of racism as a French person. And it hit me by surprise. It really hit me by surprise. The first time, it was when I was 18 and I was working in a... Hi, Saman. I was working in a department store in another country. And it so happens that it was in Scandinavia. So I'm not going to point fingers. This is not a shaming exercise. It's just an education exercise. And I'm not making it about me. I'm just trying to express so that my white friends can have a grasp of what it's like to be on the receiving end of discrimination. Thank you, Saman. My son cut my hair, so that was a really wonderful experience. It's even more special than going to the hairdresser. So I was on the receiving end of racism for the first time when I was in my teens. I was 18 and I was working in a department store in Scandinavia. And of course, back then I had dark curly hair and I spoke the language fluently enough and without accent that people could believe I was a national of that country. Which of course wasn't correct, but nevertheless. And I was serving ice cream at the counter, and some money was stolen from the till, and I was the only non-national in that team that was selling ice cream. Okay. As I said, I'm trying not to say the country because I don't want people to start, being horrible, because I think it could happen anywhere. And so I was serving ice cream and I was working as a student. I had a boyfriend in that country and I was visiting him, but I looked like a national, but I wasn't. And I had really dark curly hair, which was like unseen there. So the assumption they made about me, well, not my employer, because obviously they had my passport and everything else. But when the money went missing in the till, I was the only one taken to the office on the last floor under the roof, and I was questioned about it in a language that I didn't master, because it's a very difficult language to speak, the language of the country I was in. I mean, I had lived in that country for a year, so I had some command, but really not much. And so it was not just humiliating to be the only one questioned about the money missing in the till. It was also frightening. My life wasn't at stake, but it felt very wrong. Now, imagine if this happened to you day in, day out. I know for a fact back in France, people of color get arrested and check their IDs, because in France you have to carry an ID. And if it's not, it's illegal. And the police checks a lot more, and I don't have statistics, check people of color a lot more than white people. This is something that can, day after day after day, really create trauma. It's not the trauma that, that is obvious, but it's something that puts a strain on you. And I just want my white friends, or anybody who's white who's watching this video, to realize how deeply that can affect someone. Hi, Josephine. So that was my experience with the till, the money missing. And in the end, they recognized that I hadn't stolen the money, but why was I the only one questioned about this? And then there was another incident in the same country, and I can only explain that this country had not been exposed enough to other cultures and diversity and colors and religions. So it's quite I'm going to say natural. I don't think it's natural, but it's quite a normal, maybe normal is a better word, I don't know, to be racist when you haven't actually had interaction with other races, because then everything you know is about hearsay and really gossip. So this is why this happened to me in that country, because they weren't exposed much to immigration at all. It's changed since, and hopefully they have raised their profile in terms of racism. But back then, it wasn't the case. So the year before I worked in that department store, I actually did it in exchange as an exchange student. So I spent a year in the family where I lived. There was a local family that welcomed me in their home as their own child, which was really lovely. And when I turned 18 with some of my friends from school, we used to go to the equivalent of pubs in that country. And I wasn't aware at all of what was happening in the background, because my friends were protecting me and I didn't command the language enough. But they did share, my boyfriend shared with me later that there was a lot of racist comments made about me, and even some people who were hostile to me. And my friends tried to screen me and protect me from that hostility. And the reason was because I spoke the language without an accent, as I do now in English, or almost anyway. I'm very good at mimicking the way people speak, so I can pass for a native. And because they assumed I was a native, they assumed I was a gypsy. And the abuse that came my way was like horrific. And luckily, as I said, the lack of mastering of the language and the fact that I was quite oblivious to that thing because it's never happened to me, meant that it went a bit over my head. But it doesn't mean that I wasn't impacted by the story. And no, I'm not saying I was traumatized by it by any shot, but it just made me aware of what people of color and gypsy people and anyone who doesn't fit into society, what are they on the receiving end of. Now, I am a complete misfit, so I've been bullied in school. I actually have autism, which has not been diagnosed because, well, first of all, my parents didn't know anything about it, and now I'm having my children diagnosed, and I don't have the time to do that myself. But I, as a misfit, as someone who's not neurotypical and who's not who doesn't fit in, I know what it feels like to be on the receiving end of bullying and in a way discrimination. But none of it amounts to what people of color go through. And this is the reason why I'm doing this Facebook Live. I think it's up to us to educate ourselves. I've made that commitment to myself, and I'm starting to read a book that is very, very good about being an anti-racist. And I want to be vocal about it, but it's not just, this is the start for me. And I want to do this within my business, and I want to do this within my private life. So, but I want to come from a place of love, in the sense that I come from, half of my family was incredibly racist, anti-Semitic, and, pretty gross, really. And I've been raised in that racism as a child. And I knew from the start it was wrong. And I don't know why I haven't become a racist, because racism is something that you acquire, that someone teaches you. So I know that none of the people who are racist were born racist. And I know that if we approach them with hate, it's going to make them defensive, and they're going to be hateful even more. And they're going to try and deny that they're racist. And this happened actually to me with a cousin of mine. Again, I'm very aware of libel and all those sorts of things and legal implications about talking about people and people who are racist. But I've cut most links with my family anyway, mostly for that reason. And that cousin of mine said to me, well, I'm not racist because I'm married to a Vietnamese man. And she was so blatantly racist. And actually, I deleted her from Facebook because I just could not stand her constant racist comments on her feed. And I do send her love regularly, but I think it's important that I have been reading a little bit, and not much, to be honest, but it's really important that as white people, we take full responsibility for racism, even if we don't see ourselves as racist, okay? I don't see myself as racist, but actually, I just read in that book, and I wish I had the quote at hand too, but I'm going to share a lot in my group about this, in my business group. So if this is something you want, a journey you want to take with me, I invite you to join me in Ange's big or fabulous Big Vision Incubator, because I will be talking about these aspects a lot. Because I think if you do not stand up against discrimination and hate, then that means you're an accomplice. And for me, this is even more important because I come from a country in France that has been divided to the nth degree in the last war between collaborationists and the resistance. So you can't really, if you don't take the camp of the resistance, la résistance, and I wouldn't use that word because I'm actually a big fan of law of attraction. So for me, it's not a war against racism. It's actually an education, and I'm making sure that everybody's on board so that this pocket of ignorance reduces and reduces and reduces further, if that makes any sense. Now, the other thing I wanted to talk to you about is that on some level, I can feel the pain of, and again, not as much as they do. I'm not, it's not about me, but that's why I want to talk about this, is that I know what it feels like to have children that you know are not safe in the hands of teachers, not safe in the hands of doctors, and wouldn't be safe in the hands of the police. I know that because I have special needs children who have been bullied not just by their peers, but also by teachers and doctors and all sorts. And I've had to advocate for them to make sure that their interests were respected, that their needs was respected. And there's a lot of ignorance around that. So this is where I come from. Hand on heart, I don't have money to donate at the moment. I would say probably I don't have time either, because I homeschool on a permanent basis, not just for COVID. And I run a business and I have a household and all sorts of things. But I want to do something. And the little something that I can do is share what I'm reading and try and educate to people to what it feels like to be discriminated against and what is wrong, and how it can be a very pervasive thing. You know, it's the book I'm reading at the moment, which is called Anti-Racism, I think. I'm not even sure. Explains how someone is not a racist or a non-racist. It's an act. It's what you do that is racist. So I will say I probably have been racist or have acted in a racist way from ignorance, and we all do. And because I believe in the Ho'oponopono practice from the Hawaiian tradition of taking radical responsibility for everything, I feel I need to take radical responsibility for racism. And if I still see racism in the world, that means there's something in me that needs to be healed, and I need to cleanse myself, and I need to take responsibility for that. So that's what I'm doing in a way. It's as a spiritual lawyer, I take radical responsibility for the fact that racism exists in the world, that homophobia exists in the world. I mean, I remember having, I had more homosexual friends when I was a student than I had straight friends. And I remember my parents, and out of ignorance, my father had a good heart. I'm not going to talk about my mother because this is not a witch hunt, but I remember them saying to me that it was irresponsible to allow my children to be around my gay friends because they associated being gay with being a pedophile. For them, it meant the same thing. And it was from ignorance. And I know my father went a long way in learning different ways. My mother didn't. That was her choice. But it goes to show that education is super important, that we all need to come on board. And I came across something really interesting yesterday because I posted, I don't know if it was yesterday, but I posted that I wanted my friends of color to help me, educate me. And someone said to me, and I read an article, that said, it's your responsibility to educate yourself. You shouldn't put the burden on them to educate you. So I'm saying sorry again to my friends for making that demand on them. At the moment, the community of color is grieving very, very deeply. We are only, maybe it's because we are in COVID that it hits us in a bigger way, because it's in our face. But let's face it, it's been like that for thousands of years. And when I was, I have been on the receiving end of racism in this country, in the UK, after I moved in 2001. And I need to say, when it happened, it hit me by surprise. Now, I know that racism is rampant and it's underground, but it's when elections, like happened in the UK with Brexit and with Bojo that's come into power, and in America, Trump, they sort of give permission for what's underground to come out and to be exposed. I think it's a good thing, because it's like if you pretend nothing's happening, then it festers. At least now we know that it exists, and it is our responsibility to do something, however small, where we are. So I know that, for example, there's lots of people who encourage people to create reading book, what is it called? Book clubs, to read this book that I'm going to share the title under this video. I will put a link to purchase that book. So if you feel compelled to create a reading book, a book club, so that people can educate themselves, white people can educate themselves around issues of racism, then please do it. It's the little thing that you can do. If you can buy these books and help the authors, because then the more money they have, the more impact they can make, go ahead and do it. We can do things even in the smallest way, and I believe that even a small act of kindness can have a ripple effect. So this is really my invitation today. If you want to hear more about all these issues that I'm passionate about, I will probably talk more about it in my group, only because it has more impact. People, I'm more visible in my group than I am on Facebook, and but for sure, please stand up and say your piece. Don't be afraid to say something wrong, because you will. I have, and all you need to do, and what I'm going to say again as well, is just become aware. Self-awareness is super important. Self-responsibility, and starting with us. You know, I wasn't just raised in a racist family. I don't believe my dad was racist, but on my mum's side, it was quite prominent. On my dad's side, probably there was racism as well, but not as in your face. And my sister recently discovered that my grandfather, who was a healer, also had been in the Nazi youth. So nothing is ever straightforward. Nothing is ever simple. And if you don't think that it's possible for you to be brainwashed, I want to invite you to question this belief, because we are all brainwashed by our culture, by our upbringing, by what we hear. Everything that we hear before we're 8 years old goes straight into our subconscious, and it stays there. You might not be aware of it, but the prejudice you have against some people stays there very, very deeply. As I said earlier in this video, I don't know why I'm not a racist, like 100% racist, because that's the culture I bathed in as a kid, but sexist as well. And funnily enough, the women were as sexist as the men, and that's what happens as well. In the book I'm reading at the moment, the author explains how, as a black man, he was racist against his own people, because he had internalized all the beliefs against his race. So let's take radical responsibility for ourselves. I will welcome anyone who wants to go on this journey with me. And I will share what I'm learning as I go. So thank you for those of you who watched this video. I'm really, really grateful that you've listened. And yeah, let's make this world a better place. Bye for now.